A lot of people tend to think of Alexander as a Greek. It is not quite correct to say so. For he was really a Macedonian, that is. He came from a country just north of Greece. The Macedonians were in many ways like the Greeks. You might call them their cousins. Philip, the father of Alexander, was king of Macedonia. He was an able king and he made his little kingdom strong and built up a very efficient army. Alexander is called the Great, and he is very famous in history. But a great deal of what he did was made possible by the careful work of his father Philip before him. Whether Alexander was a really great man or not is a doubtful matter. He is certainly no hero of mine. But he succeeded in a short life in impressing his name on 2 continents. And in history he is supposed to be the first of the world conquerors. Far away in the heart of Central Asia, he is still remembered as Sikander. And whatever he may have been in reality, history has succeeded in attaching a glamour to his name. Scores of cities have been named after him and many of these still exist. The greatest of these was Alexandria, in Egypt. Alexander was only 20 when he became king. Full of ambition to achieve greatness, he was eager to march towards the old enemy, Persia, with the fine army which his father had made for him. The Greeks did not like either Philip or Alexander, but they were cowed down a little by their strength, and so they acknowledged each of them, one after the other, as the captain general of all the Greek forces which were to invade Persia. Thus they bowed down to the new power that was rising. One Greek city, Thebes, rebelled against him, and he struck at it with great cruelty and violence. He destroyed this famous city and knocked down its buildings and massacred many of its people and sold many thousands into slavery. By this barbarous behavior he terrified Greece. But this and other instances of barbarism in his life do not make him admirable for us and only repel and disgust us. Egypt, which was then under the Persian king, was easily conquered by Alexander, who had already defeated the Persian king, Darius III, a successor of Xerxes. Later he went again towards Persia and defeated Darius a second time. The great palace of Darius, the king of kings, was destroyed by Alexander. In revenge, he said, for the burning of Athens by Xerxes. There is an old book in the Persian language, written nearly 1,000 years ago, by a poet named Firdausi. The book is called the Shahnameh. It is a chronicle of the kings of Persia. This book describes, very fancifully, the battles of Alexander and Darius. It tells us that on being defeated Darius sought help from India. A camel with the pace of wind he sent to Pharaoh Porus, who was a king in the northwest of India. But Porus could not help him at all. He himself had to face the onslaught of Alexander soon afterwards. In this book, the Shahnameh of Firdausi, it is interesting to find numerous references to Indian swords and daggers being used by the Persian king and nobles. This indicates that even in Alexander's day India was making swords of fine steel, which were welcomed in foreign countries. Alexander wandered on from Persia. Through the country where Herat and Kabul and Samarkand now stand he went and reached the upper valleys of the river Indus. Here he met the first Indian ruler who opposed him. Greek historians call him Porus, after the Greek fashion. His real name must have been similar to this, but we do not know it. It is said that Porus fought bravely and it was not easy for Alexander to overcome him. Very chivalrous and very tall, Porus is said to have been. And Alexander was so impressed by his courage and chivalry that, even after defeating him, he left him in charge of his kingdom. But from being King Porus he became a satrap, or governor, of the Greeks. Alexander entered India through the Khyber Pass in the northwest, and via Taxila, which lies a little north of Rawalpindi. Even now you can see the ruins of this ancient city. After defeating Porus, Alexander appears to have considered marching south towards the Ganges, but he did not do so. And, following the Indus Valley, he returned It is interesting to think what might have happened if Alexander had marched towards the heart of Hindustan. Would he have continued to win? Or would the Indian armies have overcome him? A frontier king like Porus gave him sufficient trouble. And it is quite possible that the bigger kingdoms of Middle India might have been strong enough to check Alexander. But whatever Alexander may or may not have wished, his soldiers decided for him. They were tired and weary of many years' wanderings. Perhaps they were impressed by the fighting qualities of the Indian soldiers and did not wish to take the risk of a defeat. Whatever the reason was, the army insisted on going back, and Alexander had to agree. The return journey was, however, a disastrous one, and the army suffered from lack of food and water. Soon afterwards, in 323 B.C., Alexander died at Babylon. He never saw his home country Macedonia again after he set out for his Persian campaign. So died Alexander at the age of 33. What had this great person done during his brief career? He won some brilliant battles. He was undoubtedly a great general. But he was vain and conceited, and sometimes very cruel and violent. He thought of himself almost as a god. In fits of anger or whims of the moment, he killed some of his best friends and destroyed great cities together with their inhabitants. He left nothing solid behind him in his empire, not even proper roads that he had built. Like a meteor in the sky, he came and went, and left little of himself behind him except a memory. His family people killed each other off after his death, and his great empire fell to pieces. A world conqueror he is called. And it is said that once he sat down and wept because there was nothing more left for him to conquer. But India, except for a little bit in the northwest, was still unconquered by him. And China even then was a great state. And Alexander went nowhere near China. On his death, his empire was divided up between his generals. All this begs the question: did Alexander really build something long-lasting? Something that generations to come could thank him for? It is doubtful and makes us wonder whether Alexander really was great. What do you think? Does Alexander deserve the romanticization that history has lent him? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe.